6 credit cards, $43,000 in debt, all in my name. I had never applied for a single one of them. The woman who opened them was sitting at my kitchen table that Sunday afternoon, slicing a Granny Smith apple pie she'd baked from scratch, telling my 5-year-old daughter that she had grandma's eyes. She was wearing her church cardigan, the cream one with the pearl buttons, and she smelled like Estee Lauder Beautiful, and she was asking Owen if he wanted ice cream on top, and I was standing in the kitchen doorway watching all of it with a smile plastered to my face, thinking about the filing cabinet in her home office and the folder inside it labeled with my name. But let me start from where it looked like everything was fine, because that's the part that still makes me sick. In September of that year, our life looked exactly the way a life is supposed to look when you've done everything right. Derek and I had been married 7 years. We lived in a gray and white split level on Birchwood Drive in Glen Falls, which is one of those suburbs outside Rochester where the lawns are mowed on Saturdays and the neighbors wave and the elementary school has a good rating on greatschools.com. We had 2 kids, Lily, who was 5 and obsessed with horses and the color purple, and Owen, who was 3 and at that stage where everything he said was either hilarious or deeply alarming, with no middle ground. We had a Honda Civic that was too small for 2 car seats and a double stroller, and a savings account with $11,400 in it that we were building towards $16,000 so we could buy a used minivan without financing the whole thing. We had a budget, a real one, with a spreadsheet. I updated it every Sunday night after the kids went to bed. I taught 4th grade at Maple Creek Elementary, had been there 9 years since I was 25 and fresh out of the education program at Geneseo. I made $52,000 a year, which sounds like a living wage until you subtract health insurance premiums and the cost of classroom supplies that the district doesn't cover, and 2 kids in daycare part-time, and a mortgage that had seemed manageable in 2019 and felt tighter every year after that. Derek made more than me. He was a commercial insurance agent, good at his job, brought home around $78,000 plus commission. But we lived in that particular American way, where 2 incomes feel like 1 income once you account for everything. We weren't struggling. We weren't comfortable. We were exactly in between, which meant that every financial decision felt like it had weight to it, like the wrong move could tip something. My mornings started at 5:45. I know that sounds brutal, and it was, but it was also the only 30 minutes of the day that belonged entirely to me. I'd come downstairs in the dark, start the coffee maker, and stand at the kitchen window watching the backyard while the machine gurgled and hissed. In September, the maple in the corner was just starting to turn, the edges of the leaves going orange before the rest of the tree caught up. I liked that. I liked the in-between of it. Then I'd pack the kids' lunches. Owen still needed his sandwich cut into triangles, or he'd cry. Lily had decided she was vegetarian for reasons that were not entirely clear, but that we were mostly respecting. And I'd get them up and dressed and fed and loaded into the Civic, drop them at the Sunflower Learning Center on Maple Avenue, and make it to Maple Creek by 7:30 to set up my classroom before the kids arrived at 8:15. My classroom was room 14, second hall on the left. I'd had it for 6 years, and it felt like mine in the way that a space can feel like yours when you've spent more waking hours in it than anywhere else. I had a reading corner with a beanbag chair and a basket of paperbacks sorted by difficulty. I had a math wall with a hundreds chart and multiplication tables and a rotating problem of the week that I changed every Monday. I had 22 4th graders that year, and I knew all of them, their handwriting, their anxieties, which ones needed to be called on first thing in the morning, or they'd spiral, which ones needed to be left alone to warm up. Teaching is the kind of work where you carry other people's kids in your head all day. You drive home thinking about whether Marcus understood the lesson or just pretended to, whether Avery's home situation had gotten better or worse since the conference last week. It's exhausting, and it's also the only job I've ever wanted. Rosa Gutierrez taught 5th grade in room 15, right next door to me. We'd started at Maple Creek the same year, been assigned adjacent classrooms by accident, and become the kind of friends who are so intertwined in daily life that it's hard to remember a time before them. Rosa was 36, originally from the Bronx, had spent 4 years as a paralegal at a consumer protection firm in Manhattan before deciding that what she actually wanted to do was teach and moving upstate for the credential program. She was sharper than anyone I knew, the kind of person who reads the fine print, who asks the follow-up question, who notices the thing everyone else glosses over. We ate lunch together in her room on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we talked about our students, and our marriages, and our parents, and the particular exhaustion of being women in their 30s who were trying to do everything at once and mostly succeeding, but never without cost. Derek's mother, Patricia Cole, Pat, had been a fixture in our life from before we were even married. She was 68, widowed since 2015, when Derek's father Roger died of a heart attack at 64, and she lived alone in a paid-off colonial on Sycamore Lane in Pittsford, 12 minutes from our house. She was the kind of woman that communities build their self-image around. She had done the taxes for half the neighborhood for 30 years, first as a bookkeeper for a manufacturing company, then after she retired, just as a favor for friends and family and church members and anyone who asked. She was the treasurer at St. Michael's Episcopal. She brought casseroles when people had babies or lost parents. She remembered birthdays and allergies and anniversaries. She called Derek every Sunday morning, and every Sunday he answered, always, no matter what we were doing. She had been doing our taxes since the first year Derek and I were married. It started naturally. Derek had always had her do his, and when we filed jointly for the first time, it just made sense. She was thorough, she was accurate, she knew the deductions, and she did it for free. Every February she would call and say, "Just bring me everything in the folder, sweetie, I'll handle it," and Derek would gather our W-2s and any 1099s and our mortgage interest statement and whatever else she asked for, and a week later, she'd hand me a manila folder, always manila, always labeled in her neat bookkeeper's handwriting, and say, "Your copies, sweetie, keep these somewhere safe." And I would take the folder and put it in the second drawer of the filing cabinet in our home office without opening it. Because I trusted her. Because she was family. Because I hated paperwork, and she was offering to take it away. And when someone offers to take away the thing you hate, you let them. That September, the Sunday dinners at Pat's house were still happening every few weeks. She had a formal dining room that she used even for casual meals. Tablecloth, cloth napkins, the good china for company, and the everyday china for family, which meant we used the everyday china. She cooked the way women of her generation cooked. Roast chicken, pot roast, green bean casserole, always a pie. The house smelled like whatever was in the oven, and underneath that, always, her perfume. Estee Lauder Beautiful. I had smelled it for 7 years and associated it entirely with warmth, with being taken care of, with the particular comfort of belonging to a family that had been established before you arrived and had made room for you. That Sunday in September, the one I keep coming back to, she made pot roast and her apple pie. Lily sat next to Pat at the table, and Pat cut her pie first and told her she had her grandmother's eyes, and Lily beamed the way 5-year-olds beam when an adult gives them exclusive attention. Owen was in his booster seat eating the soft carrots from the roast one at a time with his fingers, ignoring the fork Derek kept offering him. Derek was telling Pat about a new commercial account he'd landed, a warehouse distribution company in Henrietta, and Pat was asking all the right questions, and I was eating pot roast and thinking about the week ahead and feeling, genuinely, the ordinary contentment of a Sunday evening. Earlier that week, a piece of mail had come to the house addressed to me. A credit card offer, one of those thick envelopes with "Valued Customer" in gold foil, and a pre-approval claim that was almost certainly not a real pre-approval. I'd tossed it in the recycling bin without opening it. That kind of mail came every week. You learn to ignore it. Pat was visiting that afternoon. She'd stopped by to drop off a Tupperware container of soup she'd made, and she was at the kitchen counter when I dropped the envelope in the recycling. "These companies are relentless," she said, and she picked the envelope up and pushed it down deeper into the bin, under the empty cereal boxes and the junk circulars. I remember watching her do it and thinking nothing, less than nothing. It was such a small gesture, the kind of thing a person does 100 times a day without anyone registering it. She dropped the envelope deeper in the trash, and I turned back to the stove. And that was all. That was everything. The first indication that something was wrong came on a Wednesday afternoon in the third week of October. Derek and I had been talking for months about the minivan, the Honda Odyssey, used, ideally a 2019 or 2020, dark color, under 60,000 miles. We'd priced them out, we knew what we wanted to spend, and we had enough in savings that we could put $8,000 down and finance the rest at a reasonable rate if our credit supported it. My credit score, as of the last time I'd checked it, which had been maybe 14 months earlier when we'd refinanced the mortgage, had been 811. I was proud of that number in the quiet way you're proud of things that represent years of careful behavior. I had never missed a payment in my life. Not once. Not a credit card, not a student loan, not a utility bill. 811 was the score of someone who paid attention. The dealership was AutoNation Honda off Route 31 in Rochester. I went alone on a Wednesday because Derek had client meetings, and I figured it was just a preliminary visit, just to look at the inventory and maybe start the financing conversation. The salesman was pleasant, young, in a blue tie. He showed me 3 Odysseys, a 2019 with 48,000 miles, a 2020 with 31,000, and a 2021 with 22,000 that was a little over our budget, but beautiful, dark blue, barely used. I liked the 2021. I sat in the driver's seat and thought about road trips and school pickups and having actual space for the kids, and I told the salesman I wanted to talk numbers. He took me to the finance office, where a man named Gary sat behind a desk with 2 monitors and a very careful expression. Gary typed for a moment, looked at one of his screens, and his face did something that faces do when they're trying not to show a reaction and failing, a kind of tightening around the eyes. A slight withdrawal. "Mrs. Cole," he said, and then he paused in a way that had weight to it. "There's a problem with your credit." I remember laughing. A short, reflexive laugh, the kind that's really just surprise wearing a social mask. "There must be an error," I said. "My score was 811 when we refinanced." Gary turned one of his monitors toward me. The number at the top of the screen was 487. Below it were 6 open credit card accounts, all of them maxed, all of them delinquent, most of them in collections. The cold started in my hands. Not a chill, more like the blood had simply stopped moving there, like my hands had become objects rather than parts of me. I looked at the screen and I counted the accounts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The balances were in the thousands on everyone. The oldest account had been opened in March of 2022. The most recent had been opened in January of the current year. 20 months of debt accumulation I had known nothing about. Gary was saying something about disputing errors with the credit bureaus, and his voice was kind and professional. But I was only partially hearing him, because the rest of my brain was occupied with a sound like static, like a radio between stations. I sat in the parking lot of AutoNation Honda for 22 minutes. I know this because I looked at the time when I got in the car, and again when I finally called Derek. My hands were still cold. "There are 6 credit cards in my name," I told him when he answered. "I've never opened any of them. They're all maxed and in collections." Silence on his end, and then, "What? Megan, that has to be an error. Identity theft happens. We'll call the credit card companies." I said, "Okay." I said he was probably right. I drove home, made dinner, bathed the kids, put them to bed, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop until 11:30 that night, trying to understand what I was looking at. Derek called his mother that evening. I heard his side of the conversation from the kitchen, his voice careful, explaining what I'd found. And then I heard Pat's voice through the phone, even from across the room, that warm, assured, slightly theatrical voice she used when she was being competent at something. "Oh, honey, that's obviously an error. It happens all the time, especially with all these data breaches. I'll look into it." Derek came back into the kitchen, looking visibly relieved. "Mom says it's probably a data breach. She's going to look into it." I wanted to believe that. I almost did. I sat with it for a few days. The possibility that it was a data breach, that it was random, that it was something that happened to people and could be fixed. I held that possibility the way you hold onto a railing when the ground under you feels uncertain. The collection call came the following Tuesday. I was in my classroom during my planning period, grading math tests, when my cell phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. A 585 area code, local. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A man's voice, flat and professional. "May I speak with Megan Cole?" I said yes. "Mrs. Cole, this is a call from Meridian Collection Services regarding your Capital One credit card account ending in 4471. Your account is currently 90 days past due with a balance of $7,214. I'm calling to discuss payment options." I set down my red pen very carefully on the stack of tests. "I don't have a Capital One card," I said. The collector paused. "Ma'am, this account was opened in March of 2022 at a branch in Pittsford." Pittsford, where Pat lived. "Can you tell me the address on the account?" I asked. He read it back to me. It was Pat's address on Sycamore Lane. I held the phone to my ear for a long moment after the collector finished speaking. The classroom was quiet around me. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of gym class from the other end of the building, the smell of dry erase markers, and the banana peel in my trash can. I told the collector I would call back. I set the phone down on my desk, and I looked at the math tests in front of me, the crooked columns of numbers, the eraser smudges, and I thought, Pittsford. I thought, Pat's address. I thought, she knew about the mail. The envelope she pushed deeper into the trash. That night, I pulled my full credit report. Not just the score, the full report, all 3 bureaus, every line. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop and printed it out because I needed to see it on paper, needed to be able to hold it. 14 pages. The 6 credit card accounts were all there, listed in order of opening date. I went through them one by one. Capital One, opened March 2022. Discover, opened June 2022. Chase Sapphire, opened September 2022. City Double Cash, opened January 2023. Bank of America, opened May 2023. American Express, opened September 2023. The billing addresses on the accounts alternated. Some listed our address on Birchwood Drive, some listed Pat's address on Sycamore Lane. The credit limits ranged from $4,000 to $9,000. Every single account was at or above its limit. Every single account was delinquent. I sat at that table for 20 minutes without moving. The house was quiet. Derek was asleep. The kids were asleep. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car went by on Birchwood Drive, its headlights sweeping briefly through the kitchen window, and then it was dark again. I looked at the alternating addresses. I looked at the opening dates, spread across 20 months in a pattern that seemed deliberate. Not a burst of fraud, not a single event, but a slow, methodical accumulation, one card at a time, spaced out so as not to trigger alerts, structured to look almost like normal credit behavior if you didn't look closely. Someone who knew what they were doing had done this. Someone who understood credit, who understood how accounts were opened, who understood the timing that would keep things quiet longest. Someone who had been a bookkeeper for 30 years. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I lay in the dark next to Derek, who was sleeping with the particular unconscious ease of someone who didn't yet understand what I was beginning to understand, and I stared at the ceiling, and I told myself there had to be another explanation. There had to be, because the real explanation, the one that was assembling itself in my mind, whether I wanted it to or not, meant that the woman who had handed me a manila folder every February for 7 years and told me to keep it somewhere safe had been, the entire time, keeping something very different, somewhere safe herself. I spent one more week in that state of willful uncertainty. I went to school and taught fractions, and read alouds, and helped Marcus understand long division, and noticed that Avery seemed happier this week, and I came home and made dinner, and gave baths, and read bedtime stories. And inside all of that, I carried this thing that I hadn't yet named, turning it over in the dark parts of my mind. One more week of almost. And then Rosa found me in the supply closet. It was a Thursday, the last Thursday of October. I had gone to the supply closet at the end of the second-floor hallway to get more construction paper, and I had stood there among the reams of paper and the boxes of crayons and the industrial-sized bottles of Elmer's glue, and I had started crying. Not dramatically, not sobbing, just quietly, steadily, the way water comes through a crack in a foundation. I hadn't cried about it yet, not really, and the supply closet was apparently where my body had decided it was going to happen. Rosa came in 2 minutes later, looking for scissors, and found me standing there with a ream of orange construction paper under my arm and tears running down my face. "Megan." She said my name the way you say someone's name when you're not asking a question, when you're just marking that you see them. She took the construction paper from me and set it on a shelf and said, "What's going on?" And I told her. All of it. The dealership, the score, the 6 accounts, the collector, the Pittsford address. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about Rosa, that she can listen completely. When I finished, she said, "Do you have the credit report with you?" I said it was on my phone. She held out her hand. She went through it the way I imagined she used to go through documents in the law firm, methodically, screen by screen, zooming in on the numbers and dates, her face completely still and focused. She was quiet for a long time. The supply closet smelled like paper and rubber cement, and the particular institutional cleanliness of school buildings. Finally, she looked up. "Megan, look at the opening dates." I looked. "Now look at the addresses." I looked. "This isn't random fraud," she said. Her voice was very even, very careful, the way voices get when someone is being precise, because the situation requires precision. Someone who knows your social security number, your mother's maiden name, your prior addresses, all the security questions, did this deliberately. This wasn't a data breach. This was targeted. She paused, and I watched her make the connection, watched it cross her face. "Who does your taxes?" I heard myself say, "Pat." And the word felt like stepping off a curb when you thought there was more sidewalk. Rosa nodded slowly. She handed my phone back. "You need to find out if she has your documents," she said. "Your SSN card, your birth certificate. If she's been doing your taxes, she has everything she'd need." She paused again. "Megan, I want to say this clearly. If what I think happened is what happened, this isn't a family problem. This is a crime." I drove to Pat's house the following Saturday morning. Pat went to St. Michael's every Saturday for the weekly volunteer breakfast. She was there from 8 to noon, reliable as a calendar entry. Derek had given me a key to the house years ago, for emergencies, and I had never used it. I drove the 12 minutes to Pittsford with my hands on the wheel and the radio off, and a feeling in my chest like the moment before a car accident, that suspended instant where you know what's coming and can't stop it. The neighborhood was quiet in the Saturday morning way. A man walking a retriever, a woman pulling her trash bins back from the curb. Pat's Colonial sat on its lot, looking exactly as it always had. The shutters painted black, the mums in the window boxes going brown at the edges in the October cold. I let myself in through the side door. The house smelled like Estee Lauder Beautiful and coffee and the particular stillness of a house where someone lives alone. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, just standing there, my keys in my hand, looking at the familiar geography of the place, the rooster-themed dish towels, the ceramic cookie jar shaped like a barn, the family photos on the refrigerator, one of which was Lily at age 2, gap-toothed and laughing. Then I went down the hall to Pat's home office. The office was the second bedroom, the one that had been Derek's when he was a teenager. Pat had converted it completely. Desk, filing cabinet, a bookshelf full of tax guides and accounting manuals, a printer, a shredder. The desk was neat in the way that a professional's desk is neat. Everything in its place, a particular kind of order that communicates competence. The filing cabinet was a two-drawer metal one, gray, the kind you see in every office. I stood in front of it for a moment. My hands were not shaking yet. I was still in the part of this where I was moving on adrenaline and purpose, before the reality of what I was finding had a chance to land. I opened the second drawer. It was organized alphabetically, hanging folders with typed labels. I found the folder labeled Megan between one labeled Mason, Robert, and one labeled Miller, Diane. I pulled it out. I set it on the desk. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a photocopy of my Social Security card, then my driver's license, both sides, then my birth certificate. They were paper-clipped together, neat, organized, as if they were just documents in a file, as if there was nothing wrong with having them. My hands began to shake then, not dramatically, a fine tremor, the kind that makes papers rattle slightly when you hold them. I set the documents down on the desk, and I kept going through the folder. Behind the ID copies were credit card activation letters. 4 of them, from 4 different card companies, opened and read and filed. Behind those were monthly statements, 3 years' worth, organized chronologically, rubber-banded by account. I picked up the first rubber-banded stack. Capital 1. 26 months of statements. I flipped through them. The purchases were specific, concrete, the kind of detail that makes an abstract wrong into a real one. Pottery Barn, $847. QVC, $1,240 in a single month. Michael's, $312. A charge at Wegmans that seemed too large for groceries and too small for a party. A charge at a dental office in Pittsford. A charge from Royal Caribbean International for $6,800. I sat down on the floor of Pat's home office. I didn't choose to sit. My legs simply made the decision without consulting me. I was sitting on the carpet between the filing cabinet and the desk, holding a stack of credit card statements with my name at the top, in a house that smelled like Estee Lauder Beautiful, and the perfume was everywhere, inescapable, woven into the air of every room, and I knew that I would never smell it again without feeling exactly this: the specific, physical, total sensation of a world reorganizing itself around a truth you cannot unknow. I counted the statements, 67 pages across the 6 accounts. I took out my phone. I photographed every single page, every document, the Social Security card copy, the driver's license copy, the birth certificate, the activation letters, all of it. 67 photographs. My hands were shaking the entire time, and I had to retake 4 of them because they were blurry. When I was done, I put everything back in the folder exactly as I had found it. Same order, same rubber bands, same position in the drawer. I left the filing cabinet closed. I left the office exactly as it was. I let myself out of the house. I sat in my car in Pat's driveway for 4 minutes, and then I drove home. Derek was in the backyard with the kids when I got back. Owen was on the swing, Derek pushing him, Lily drawing something with sidewalk chalk on the patio. I watched them from the kitchen window. This ordinary Saturday scene, yellow October light, my husband and my children in the backyard. And I felt a grief that had nothing to do with the credit cards. I felt it for the version of my life that had existed until about an hour ago, the version where the woman who handed me that manila folder every February was just a difficult but well-meaning mother-in-law, where the trust I'd given so easily had been deserved. I waited until the kids were in bed that night. I made sure they were actually asleep, checked both rooms, listened for breathing, pulled Owen's blanket up because he always kicked it off. Then I came downstairs and sat at the kitchen table and opened the photos on my phone and laid them out in a grid on the screen, and I called Derek in from the living room where he was watching football. He came in still holding his beer, his face easy and unsuspecting, and I said, Sit down. I need to show you something. I showed him the photos one by one. I didn't talk while he looked. I let the images do the work. His face went through several things in quick succession. Confusion, a kind of effortful blankness, then something that looked almost like anger, but wasn't quite directed at the right target. When he got to the photo of my Social Security card copy, he stopped scrolling. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at me. "Where did you find these?" he asked. His voice was careful in a way that made my stomach tighten. "In your mother's filing cabinet," I said. "In a folder with my name on it." He set the phone down on the table. He pressed both hands flat against the wood, like he was steadying himself. "Why were you going through my mother's files?" he said. The question hit me like a splash of cold water. Not because it was cruel, exactly, but because of what it revealed. That his first instinct, confronted with evidence that his mother had stolen my identity, was to question why I had been looking, to make my investigation the problem rather than her crime. I kept my voice level. "Derek, focus. Your mother stole my identity. Those are my documents in her filing cabinet. Those are credit cards opened in my name with her address. That's $43,000 in debt that's been destroying my credit for 20 months. He stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to me, looking at the dark backyard, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was working. "There has to be a reason," he said finally. "There has to be an explanation. Maybe she was trying to help us build credit, and it got out of hand. Maybe there's something we don't know." "Build credit?" I said. The words came out more quietly than I expected. "She destroyed it, Derek. My score is 487. We can't buy the minivan. We probably can't refinance. There are 6 accounts in collections with my name on them, and your mother's address on the billing statements. The explanation is that she used my personal information to open credit cards and spent $43,000 on furniture and QVC and dental work and a cruise." "A cruise?" His voice cracked slightly on the word. "Royal Caribbean, $6,800. I watched his back, while we were eating rice and beans trying to save for a minivan. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Let me call her." I said, "Derek, don't." He said, "I just need to hear her explain it." And he took his phone and went upstairs, and I sat at the kitchen table alone, and I heard his footsteps overhead, the low murmur of his voice through the ceiling, and I thought about how many times in 7 years of marriage I had heard that sound, Derek upstairs, talking to his mother, and never once had it frightened me. It frightened me now. The call Pat made to me the next morning came at 7:15, before school. I was in the kitchen getting the kids' breakfast, Lily's cereal poured, Owen's toast in the toaster, and my phone buzzed on the counter. Pat's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer that either. But I did, because I needed to hear what she would say, because some part of me, still, even then, even with 67 photographs on my phone, was waiting for the explanation that would make this not what it was. Pat was crying when she answered. Not the subtle, dignified crying of someone in genuine distress. Theatrical crying, the kind with audible gasps and strategic pauses. "Megan, sweetheart," she said, and her voice was wet and broken. "I can explain everything. Please, please just let me explain." I stood at the kitchen counter with the phone to my ear, and I said very quietly, so the kids wouldn't hear, "I'm listening," she said. "After Roger died, I got into some trouble. Medical bills. His last months were so expensive. The insurance didn't cover everything, and I panicked. I made a terrible mistake. I was going to pay it all back. I swear to you, I was making payments toward it, but then it got away from me, and I was too ashamed to say anything." Another sob. "Please, Megan, please don't go to the police. Think about what this would do to the family. Think about Lily and Owen seeing their grandmother in handcuffs. We can handle this privately. We can work out a payment plan. I will pay back every penny, I promise you. Please, please don't destroy the family over a mistake." The toast popped up. I took it out and put it on Owen's plate and cut it into 4 squares the way he liked. Lily was asking me something about her cereal. I told her 1 minute, sweetheart. I stood there in my kitchen, the ordinary morning chaos of breakfast happening around me, and I listened to my mother-in-law cry, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. The pull of it. The gravitational pull of being asked to keep the peace, to absorb the damage, to let someone who had hurt you frame the hurt as a mistake and ask you to protect them from its consequences. I felt how easy it would be to say, okay, to say we'll figure it out, to go back to the Sunday dinners and the casseroles and the manila folders and pretend. I felt how much of my life had been spent in exactly that kind of accommodation, that particular female labor of smoothing and absorbing and making things okay for everyone else. I said, I'll think about it, Pat. And I hung up, and I gave Owen his toast, and I drove the kids to Sunflower and drove myself to Maple Creek, and I thought about it all day. I thought about it during math block and reading time and lunch and my planning period. And by 3 o'clock, when the kids filed out and the classroom went quiet, I had thought about it enough to know that thinking about it was not what I needed to do. What I needed to do was look at the cruise. I pulled up the photo of the Royal Caribbean statement on my phone. The charge was from October 2023. I looked it up. The sailing it corresponded to was a 7-night Bahamas cruise out of Port Canaveral, a balcony cabin, for 2. I thought about who Pat would have taken. I thought about her friend Diane Miller, who lived 2 streets over from Pat, who Pat had mentioned going to dinner with, going to the movies with, the friend she'd known since their kids were in school together. I thought about Pat in a balcony cabin in the Bahamas in October 2023. I thought about where I had been in October 2023. I had been here. I had been in this classroom and in that split level on Birchwood Drive, and in the Civic that was too small for 2 car seats, and I had been adding to the savings account $50 at a time, and I had been eating rice and beans on the nights when we were trying to cut the grocery budget, and my mother-in-law had been on a cruise ship in the Caribbean on my credit. I did not handle it privately. I called Derek from the school parking lot, and I said, I'm not handling it privately. He started to say something, and I said, Derek, listen to me. She went on a cruise, on my credit card. A 7-night Bahamas cruise in a balcony cabin, while we were saving for a minivan. I'm not handling that privately. A long silence. Then, I hear you, I need a few days. I said, you have until Sunday. I drove home. I made dinner. I was very calm. The following Wednesday, I drove to Pat's house again, this time with Pat there. I called ahead and told her I was coming. I needed to talk to her, I said. Just the 2 of us. She said, of course, sweetheart, come whenever you're ready. And her voice was warm and careful, in a way that told me she thought she'd won the previous conversation, that she'd cried enough and said the right things, and I was coming to discuss the quiet, private resolution she wanted. She had made coffee. Of course she had made coffee. She was in her kitchen cardigan, the cream one with the pearl buttons, and the house smelled like coffee and Estee Lauder beautiful, and the particular performance of domesticity she'd been giving for 37 years. She poured 2 mugs and set them on the kitchen table and sat across from me with her hands folded and her eyes soft and concerned and said, I'm so glad you came, sweetheart. I know this has been so hard. I put my phone on the table between us, screen up, with the photo of the Royal Caribbean charge displayed. I want to talk about the cruise, I said. Something happened to Pat's face. It was very small, a microsecond of recalibration, a flicker behind the eyes, and then the softness was back, but I had seen the flicker. That was a terrible mistake, she said. I was in a very dark place after Roger died, and Diane suggested the trip, and I thought, I know this sounds awful. I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed. I was wrong. I'm so ashamed. You went in October 2023, I said. My credit card was opened in September 2022. You'd been using it for over a year before the cruise. I watched her. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a pattern. Her hands unfolded. She picked up her coffee mug and held it with both hands, a gesture that looked like composure but read, now that I was watching carefully, like buying time. "Megan, I understand you're upset," she said. "I understand this looks bad, but I want you to think about what going to the police would mean for this family. Derek loves you. He needs you. But if you do this, if you drag his mother into a courtroom, that's something a marriage doesn't recover from. Is that what you want? To blow up your family over money?" "Over $43,000, I said. "That you spent." "That I will pay back," she said. Her voice had shifted, still warm, but with an edge under it now, like the surface of a frozen pond that's been walked on too many times. "Every penny. I have equity in this house. I can arrange—" "You also have a friend named Ellen Bryce," I said. The coffee mug stopped moving. Pat set it down on the table with a careful, deliberate motion. Her face did not change, but something behind her face did. "I don't know what you're referring to," she said. "I think you do." I kept my voice even. "Ellen Bryce, your former sister-in-law. A civil judgment in 2011. The same pattern. Credit cards opened in her name. Approximately $29,000. Settled privately." I paused. "Privately? Which means it went away. Which means you didn't face any consequences. And then you waited, and you found another opportunity, and you did it again." I looked at her. "How many times, Pat?" The warmth was entirely gone from her face now. In its place was something I had never seen there before. A cold, assessing look. The look of someone running calculations. She sat very still for a moment. Then she said, "Who do you think Derek will believe? His wife of 7 years? Or his mother of 37? She said it quietly, without particular emotion, and she was almost smiling. Not quite. A ghost of a smile, the kind that's really just confidence wearing a social mask. "You can show him whatever you want. I know my son. I have known him his entire life. And I am telling you that if you go to the police, you will lose him. Is that what you want?" I looked at her across the table. The coffee was getting cold between us. The kitchen was very quiet. "I think," I said, "that you should call a lawyer." I picked up my phone, put it in my pocket, and left. I sat in my car in Pat's driveway for a moment, and then I drove to Rosa's house. Rosa lived in Penfield, 15 minutes east, in a small ranch house she'd bought 3 years ago, and she answered the door in pajama pants and a Geneseo sweatshirt with a glass of wine in her hand. Because it was a Wednesday evening, and she was a grown woman in her own home. She took one look at my face and stepped aside to let me in. I told her everything, the confrontation, what Pat had said, the Ellen Bryce judgment. Rosa set down her wine glass and picked up her laptop. She was a former paralegal. She knew how to search public records. It took her 40 minutes of searching through Monroe County and then neighboring counties before she found it. A civil judgment filed in 2011 in Ontario County. Patricia M. Cole as defendant, Ellen Bryce as plaintiff, for credit fraud and identity theft. The amount was listed, $29,400. The resolution was marked as settled. The details were sealed by mutual agreement. Pat had paid something. Rosa couldn't tell how much. And Ellen Bryce had agreed not to pursue criminal charges, and Patricia Cole had walked away. Rosa looked up from the laptop. "She did this before," she said. "She did it to someone else, and she got away with it, and she did it again." She paused. "Megan, this isn't a family problem that got out of hand. This is a predator who learned that private settlements mean no consequences. You cannot handle this privately." I already knew that. I had known it since the cruise. But hearing Rosa say it, hearing the word predator applied to the woman who had been slicing pie at my kitchen table, made it real in a different way. Made it land in the part of me that had still, on some cellular level, been hoping I was wrong. The Sunday dinner happened anyway. I'm still not entirely sure why I went. Some part of me, I think, wanted to see it. Wanted to watch Pat perform normalcy at a table full of people who didn't know. Wanted to understand what I was dealing with. Derek's brother Craig and his wife Beth were there. Craig was 40, an engineer. lived in Fairport, had 2 kids a little older than ours. They were good people. I liked Beth. She was a school nurse, practical and warm, the kind of woman who kept a first aid kit in her purse and actually knew how to use it. Pat had made roast chicken. The table was set with the everyday china, the cloth napkins, the centerpiece of dried autumn flowers she'd put together herself. She was wearing a blue blouse and her pearl earrings, and she looked, as she always looked, like exactly what she had always appeared to be. A kind, capable, church-going widow who loved her family and took care of everyone around her. She poured wine and asked Craig about his job, and asked Beth about the kids, and cut Owen's chicken into small pieces because he was still working on the fork thing, and she was so completely, so effortlessly herself that for a moment, for one disorienting moment, I felt the vertigo of doubt. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation I hadn't found yet. Maybe. Then she looked at me across the table and said, with a smile so warm it should have been a fire hazard, "Megan's been under so much stress lately, haven't you, sweetie?" And the way she said it, the slight emphasis on stress, the sweetie that was both affectionate and diminutive, I understood what she was doing. She was preemptively framing me, planting the seed, getting the story out there before I could, so that anything I said would read as a stressed woman's overreaction. I set down my fork. I looked at Craig, who was in the middle of passing the bread basket to Beth. I said, "Pat, should I tell them about the 6 credit cards, or would you like to?" The table went quiet. Not gradually, immediately, completely, the way sound stops when something unexpected happens. Craig set the bread basket down. Beth looked at me. Derek stared at his plate with the focused intensity of someone trying to disappear into it. Pat's expression didn't change for a full 2 seconds, and then it changed all at once. The smile gone, replaced by something careful and controlled, and very slightly afraid. "What credit cards?" Craig said. I kept my eyes on Pat. "Your mother opened 6 credit cards in my name and charged $43,000 on them over the past 20 months. My credit score went from 811 to 487. We can't buy the minivan we've been saving for. I've received 47 collection calls." I paused. "She also took a cruise. Royal Caribbean, Bahamas, 7 nights. Balcony cabin. $6,800. On my card." Craig's fork was still in his hand. He hadn't moved it. "Mom," he said. Just that. Just her name. "She's exaggerating," Pat said. Her voice was steady, impressively so. "It was a misunderstanding. I was helping them with their finances, and some things got confused. It's being handled." She looked at me with something that was not quite a warning, but was adjacent to one. "This really isn't the time or place, Megan." I took my phone from my pocket. I opened the photos. I placed the phone on the table in front of Craig. "This is the folder she kept in her filing cabinet," I said. "That's my Social Security card copy. That's my driver's license. Those are the activation letters. Those are the statements." Craig picked up the phone. He went through the photos slowly, the way someone goes through them when they're hoping the next one will show them they misread the previous one. His face changed as he scrolled. Not dramatically, not explosively, but in the way that a face changes when something structural inside a person shifts. By the time he set the phone down, his jaw was set and his eyes were very still. He passed the phone to Beth without a word. Beth looked at the screen. She looked at Pat. She reached for her purse, which was hanging on the back of her chair, and she pulled it slightly closer to her body. An instinctive gesture, involuntary, the gesture of someone who has just realized they might be in the presence of a threat. I watched her do it, and I thought, she's thinking about her own Social Security number. She's thinking about her own taxes. "Mom," Craig said again, and this time the word had a different texture. "What did you do?" Pat set down her wine glass. She folded her napkin with precise, deliberate movements. "This is not a conversation I'm going to have at dinner," she said. "When everyone has calmed down, we can discuss this rationally. Megan is upset, and she's not seeing the full picture." She looked at Derek. "Derek, can you please—" "Don't," Derek said. He said it to his plate, not to her, and it was barely above a whisper. But it was the first time in 7 years I had heard him use that tone with his mother, and it landed in the room like something heavy being set down. Nobody finished their dinner. Craig and Beth left 30 minutes later. In the driveway, while Derek was getting the kids into their car seats, Craig pulled me aside. "I'm sorry," he said. I don't know what to say." I said, "Check your credit." He looked at me. "You and Beth, pull your reports tonight." He nodded slowly. His face was the face of a man who didn't want to find what he suspected he might find. He called me 2 days later. It was a Tuesday evening, just after 7, and I was washing dishes when my phone rang. "Beth has 2 cards she didn't open," Craig said. His voice was flat, emptied out. "Total balance is $14,000. One of them has been open for almost 2 years. I turned off the faucet and stood at the sink with water still on my hands and said, "I'm so sorry, Craig." He said, "She did it to both of us." I said yes. He said, "I should have checked sooner." I said, "We all should have. She counted on that." After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen sink for a long time. The water dripped from my hands onto the floor. I thought about Pat at that table. The ease of her, the confidence of her, the way she had looked at me and said, "Who do you think he'll believe?" I thought about Ellen Bryce in 2011, who had also handled it privately, who had also probably been told to think about the family, who had also probably been made to feel that her own victimization was somehow a threat to the people around her. And I thought about Lily. I thought about Lily turning 18, going off to college, establishing her credit history, and what might happen to it if Pat was still operating, still trusted, still given access. I thought about that, and something in me that had still been wavering stopped wavering entirely. I went to the kitchen table. I opened my laptop. I navigated to the FTC's Identity Theft Reporting website. I began to fill out the report. The house was quiet. Derek was upstairs. The kids were asleep. The kitchen smelled like dish soap and the remnants of the pasta I'd made for dinner. The clock on the microwave said 9:47 p.m. I typed slowly and carefully, entering each account, each amount, each date, the name of the person I believed responsible, and my reasons for believing it. I uploaded the photographs from my phone, all 67 of them. I wrote out the timeline in the free text section, everything I knew, in order, with dates. I submitted the report at 1:47 a.m. The confirmation number came back immediately, a string of digits that I screenshot and saved in 3 places. Then I closed the laptop and sat at the table in the quiet kitchen and felt, for the first time since the dealership, something that was not fear or grief or the nauseating uncertainty of almost knowing. I felt clear. I felt the particular clarity of a decision made after a long time of not deciding, the relief of having crossed from the territory of wondering into the territory of acting. I filed the police report the next morning before school. I went to the Glen Falls Police Department at 7 a.m., before drop-off, which meant I had both kids with me. Lily sat on a plastic chair in the waiting area and drew horses in her notebook. Owen sat next to her and ate the goldfish crackers I'd brought in a Ziploc bag and periodically offered some to the officer at the front desk, who declined politely each time. The detective who took my statement was a woman named Karen Ostrowski, mid-40s, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the efficient manner of someone who has heard a lot of things and is not easily surprised. She listened to everything I said. She looked at the photographs on my phone. She made notes. When I finished, she said, "Mrs. Cole, based on what you've described, this meets the threshold for federal identity theft. We'll be referring this to the Postal Inspector's office given the mail fraud component. The statements were mailed to her address. You should also expect contact from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit." She looked at me over her glasses. "You did the right thing documenting everything before you confronted her." I drove the kids to Sunflower. I drove myself to Maple Creek. I taught fractions and a read-aloud about a girl who trains a horse and helped Marcus with long division and ate lunch with Rosa, who already knew I had texted her at 2 a.m., and who sat across from me with her sandwich and said, "You did the right thing." I said, "I know." She said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. "Like I'm standing on solid ground," I said, "for the first time in a month." That afternoon, I called Alan Whitfield. His name had come from Rosa, who had known him tangentially from her paralegal days. She said he was a consumer protection attorney who specialized in identity theft and credit fraud cases, that he was precise and experienced, and not someone you wanted to be across a table from if you were in the wrong. His office was in downtown Rochester, in a building on East Avenue with a parking garage and a lobby that smelled like carpet cleaner and copy paper. His assistant got me an appointment for the following Thursday. Alan Whitfield was 55, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had probably always looked slightly older than its age, sharp-featured, dry, with eyes that assessed everything with the same level, unhurried attention. He wore a navy suit and a watch that was expensive without being flashy. He shook my hand and gestured to the chair across from his desk and said, "Tell me everything from the beginning." And I did. I talked for 40 minutes. He didn't interrupt once. He looked at the photographs, all 67 of them, scrolling through my phone with the same methodical attention Rosa had shown. He looked at the credit reports. He looked at the FTC confirmation number and the police report number I'd written on a notepad. He looked at the public records Rosa had pulled on the Ellen Bryce case. When I was done, he set everything down and folded his hands on the desk and looked at me. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "in 30 years of practice, this is the most methodical identity theft I have seen from a family member." He paused. The duration, the pacing of the account openings, the alternating billing addresses, that's not someone who panicked and made a mistake. That's someone who understood credit systems and used that understanding deliberately to minimize detection. He paused again. The prior case against her is significant. She has a documented pattern. That will matter to the prosecution. He told me the charges that were likely: federal identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud, potentially bank fraud. He told me the civil damages I could potentially recover, the debt itself, damages for the harm to my credit, emotional distress. He said he would take the case on contingency, meaning he would be paid from any settlement or judgment rather than by me up front. He said the timeline would be long. Criminal cases moved slowly, credit restoration even slower, 2 to 3 years before my score fully recovered. He said, "This is going to take time and it's going to be hard. But the evidence you've collected is exceptional. You've done the work already. My job is to make sure the right people see it." Derek came to me that Thursday night. I was at the kitchen table when he came downstairs. The kids were in bed. The house was quiet. I had the credit reports spread out in front of me and Alan Whitfield's business card next to my laptop. Derek sat down across from me. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Tired in the way that comes from carrying something heavy over a long distance. "Is there any way," he said slowly, "that we can handle this without the police?" "She's my mother, Megan. She's 68 years old. If this goes to trial." "She stole from me," I said. I said it quietly, without anger, because I was past the anger now. I was in a different place entirely. "She stole from Beth. She stole from Ellen Bryce in 2011, and she got away with it, and she did it again. If I don't stop her now—" I paused. "Derek, think about Lily. When Lily turns 18 and goes to college and tries to establish her credit history, your mother has had our personal information for 7 years. What's to stop her?" He was quiet. "What's to stop her from doing it to Lily?" I said. "Our daughter?" He had no answer for that. He sat across from me for a long time without speaking, and I watched him. This man I had been married to for 7 years. This man I had built a life with. This man whose first instinct, when I showed him evidence of his mother's crime, had been to ask why I was going through her files, and I felt something complicated, something that was not quite love and not quite grief and not quite anger, but contained elements of all three. He was not evil. He was not cruel. He was a man who had been raised to believe that his mother was infallible, and he was watching that belief dismantle in real time, and it was costing him something that I could see on his face, even if I couldn't fully name it. He was learning. He was just learning very slowly, and at my expense. "Okay," he said finally. The word was barely audible. "Okay." He looked at the table. "What do we do?" The search warrant was executed on a Tuesday morning in November. I know the time precisely because I was in my classroom, in the middle of morning, meeting with my 22 fourth graders, when my phone buzzed in my desk drawer with a text from Detective Ostrowski. "Warrant executed this morning. Successful." I kept my face completely neutral. I led the morning meeting. We did the calendar and the weather chart, and I read them the first chapter of Charlotte's Web, which I had been planning to start that week, and I thought about a gray colonial on Sycamore Lane in Pittsford, and a filing cabinet being opened by people with badges and gloves and evidence bags. The federal postal inspector and 2 local officers had arrived at Pat's house at 8:15 a.m. Pat had been in her driveway, coming back from getting the newspaper. She still got the paper delivered, had always gotten it delivered, one of those habits that outlasted their era. She was in her bathrobe and slippers, holding the Democrat and Chronicle, when the officers identified themselves. They seized the filing cabinet. They seized the desktop computer. They seized 3 years of printed statements and the folder labeled Megan, and a second folder, which Rosa and I had not found because it was in the first drawer rather than the second, labeled Craig and Beth. They arrested Pat in her driveway at approximately 8:25 a.m. Her neighbor across the street, a retired teacher named Frances, who had been getting her own paper, watched from her front walk. Frances had known Pat for 22 years. Frances had also had Pat do her taxes. The charges that came down 2 weeks later were extensive. 6 counts of federal identity theft for my accounts, 2 additional counts for Beth's accounts, and then the federal prosecutor, having been made aware of the Ellen Bryce case through Alan Whitfield's brief, contacted Ellen Bryce directly. Ellen was 58 now, living in Buffalo, and she had been waiting 11 years for a call like that. She agreed to cooperate. 3 additional counts were added, reopened from the 2011 case, which the statute of limitations had not yet run on under federal law. 11 counts total. Pat was 68 years old, a retired bookkeeper, a church treasurer, a woman who had done taxes for half the neighborhood, a woman that everyone called a saint, and she was facing 11 federal counts. Her attorney, a defense attorney from Rochester named Gerald Pruitt, negotiated hard. He argued age, health, no prior criminal convictions. The prosecutor's office countered with the 11 counts, the documented pattern, the evidence that was, as Alan Whitfield had said, exceptionally methodical. They went back and forth for 6 weeks. The plea agreement that came out of it was 4 counts. 4 counts of federal identity theft, with sentencing guidelines that, given the amounts involved and the pattern of behavior and the number of victims, pointed toward incarceration. Pat pleaded guilty on a Thursday morning in January. She did not look at Craig and Beth when she entered the plea. She did not look at me. She looked at the judge, and she said the words the agreement required her to say, and she looked very small in the courtroom in her good blue coat, the one she wore to church. Sentencing was 6 weeks later, in February. The judge was a federal district judge named the Honorable Sandra Reeves, who was 61 and had been on the bench for 14 years, and had the demeanor of someone who had seen everything and was still capable of being displeased by it. I gave a victim impact statement. I had written it over 3 evenings at the kitchen table, after the kids were in bed, rewriting it 4 times until it said exactly what I needed it to say, no more and no less. I stood at the podium in the federal courtroom, and I did not cry. I had cried. I had cried alone in the car, and in the supply closet with Rosa, and once, very quietly, in the shower at 2 in the morning, when I was sure the kids were asleep and Derek couldn't hear. But not here. Not in this room. I read from my statement in a voice that was steady and clear and without particular emotion, because the facts themselves carried all the emotion that was needed. From March 2022 to September 2023, Patricia Cole opened 6 credit card accounts in my name without my knowledge or consent. She used my social security number, date of birth, and other personal information that I had provided to her in trust for the purpose of tax preparation. She charged a total of $43,216 on these accounts. She did not tell me. She did not ask me. She did not intend to stop until she was caught. I paused. My credit score went from 811 to 487. I was unable to purchase a safe vehicle for my family. I was denied refinancing on my home at a rate that would have saved us $400 a month. I received 47 collection calls in 9 months, including calls to my work phone. I was denied a department store credit card for which I had a coupon. I paused again. While I was being denied that department store card, Patricia Cole was on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship in the Bahamas, in a balcony cabin, on my account. I looked up from the paper. I trusted her with my personal information because she was my husband's mother, and she offered to help us. She used that trust as a tool. I will be rebuilding my credit for the next 2 to 3 years. I will be explaining this to my children when they are old enough to understand it. I will be checking my credit report every month for the rest of my life because of what she taught me about what trust costs when it's given without verification. I sat down. Judge Reeves looked at Pat for a long moment. Pat was looking at Derek. Derek was looking at the floor. The sentence was 18 months in federal prison, with credit for time served in pretrial detention, which amounted to 11 days. 5 years of supervised probation following release. $57,000 in restitution. My accounts, Beth's accounts, a portion of what had been determined for the Ellen Bryce reopened case, and legal fees. Pat was to report to FCY Danbury in Connecticut within 30 days. In the hallway outside the courtroom afterward, while Derek was talking to his brother in a low voice near the windows, and Beth was on the phone with her mother, Pat walked past me in the direction of her attorney. She was moving carefully, like someone in pain, though I didn't think the pain was physical. She had her coat folded over her arm, and her good purse, and she was looking straight ahead. She would have walked past me entirely without speaking, but I said her name. She stopped. She turned. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not the cold calculation I'd seen at her kitchen table, not the theatrical grief of the phone call. Something quieter than all of those. Something that might, in another person, have been shame. "You had my social security number for 7 years," I said. My voice was level. It was the voice I used when I was explaining something important to my 4th graders. Not loud, not emotional, just clear. "You could have used it to help us. Instead, you used it to help yourself." I looked at her. That's the part I'll never understand. She held my gaze for one moment. Then she turned and walked away, and Gerald Pruitt fell into step beside her, and they went down the hallway together, and I watched them go, and then I turned and found Rosa standing behind me. She had driven down from Glen Falls for the sentencing, had sat in the gallery in her good coat and her teacher's face, and Rosa looked at me and nodded once, and I nodded back, and that was enough. The 14 months that followed the sentencing were not easy. I want to be honest about that, because the version of this story that ends with the courthouse scene and a sense of triumphant resolution would be leaving out the part where I had to actually live through the aftermath, and the aftermath was its own kind of hard. Credit restoration is not a dramatic process. It is a slow, bureaucratic, paper-intensive process that requires you to write dispute letters, and wait, and write follow-up letters, and wait, and call, and wait, and document everything, and wait some more. I sent dispute letters to all 3 credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, for all 6 accounts. Some disputes resolved quickly. Others required additional documentation, additional letters, additional follow-up. Alan Whitfield's office handled most of the formal correspondence, But I was involved in every step, because I had decided that I was going to understand every piece of paper that had my name on it from now on, and that understanding required me to actually read them. My credit score the month after the sentencing was 512. 3 months later, it was 581. At the 6-month mark, it crossed 600. At 9 months, it was 644. At 14 months, when I sat down to do my taxes for the first time by myself, it was 711, and Alan Whitfield's office had confirmed that, with the fraudulent accounts fully removed and the restitution payments beginning to come in, it would continue climbing. Not back to 811 in one jump. That kind of score is built over years of consistent behavior, and the damage to the length of my credit history was real and would take time to recover. But climbing, moving, going in the right direction under my own power. Derek moved to a one-bedroom apartment in Pittsford in December, 3 months after the sentencing. It was a mutual decision in the way that some decisions are mutual, meaning both people knew it was coming, and neither person wanted to be the one to say it first. We were in couples counseling, had been since November, with a therapist named Dr. Elaine Park, who had an office in Brighton, and the particular skill of asking questions that seemed simple and were not. The sessions were hard. Derek was learning, in the careful, halting way, that people learn things they should have known already. How to see what had happened not as a tragedy that had befallen his family, but as a pattern of harm that his deference had enabled. He was learning to separate his love for his mother from his obligation to protect her from consequences. He was learning that those were different things. He was not there yet. But he was trying, and trying counted for something, even when it didn't count for enough. He came for the kids 3 days a week and every other weekend, and he was a good father in those visits. Present, attentive, the kind of dad who got on the floor and played and read the bedtime stories all the way through, even when he was tired. Lily missed him. Owen was too young to fully understand the change, but he had his own way of registering it. He started carrying a small stuffed dog that Derek had given him everywhere he went, tucking it under his arm with a possessiveness that broke my heart a little. I told them Daddy loved them and was living nearby, and they would see him all the time. And Lily asked once why Daddy didn't live with us anymore, and I said sometimes grown-ups need to figure some things out, and she accepted this with the philosophical pragmatism of a 5-year-old who has more important things to think about, like horses. Pat was released after 13 months. Good behavior, the federal prison system being what it is, and her age factoring into the calculation. She did not return to Glen Falls or to Pittsford. She went to live with Diane, the cruise friend, the woman she had taken to the Bahamas on my credit, in Diane's house in Canandaigua, 40 minutes east. Craig did not speak to her. He had been clear about that from the courthouse hallway, had said it to her face in a conversation I was not present for, but that he told me about afterward. I have nothing to say to you. You know what you did. Beth's civil suit against Pat was still working its way through the courts at the time of Pat's release, and the outcome of that suit was expected to be a judgment against Pat for the full $14,000 plus damages. Pat's house on Sycamore Lane, the paid-off colonial she had lived in for 30 years, where Derek had grown up, where the filing cabinet had sat in the second bedroom, had been sold during her incarceration to pay a portion of the restitution. She had owned it outright, and it had been worth $240,000. It was a brick colonial with black shutters and mums in the window boxes, and it was now owned by a young couple with a baby, and I tried not to think about that too much. Rosa was promoted to assistant principal at Maple Creek Elementary in March, 7 months after the sentencing. She was the best choice for the job, and everyone knew it, including me, even though it meant she no longer taught Room 15, and our Tuesday and Thursday lunches became Tuesday lunches only, because her schedule was different now. We still ate together every Tuesday in her new office rather than her old classroom, and we still talked about students and marriages and the particular exhaustion of being women in their 30s who were doing everything at once and mostly succeeding, but never without cost. She had been there for every part of this, the supply closet, the public records search, the courthouse. And there was a kind of friendship that gets forged in those circumstances that is different from ordinary closeness, deeper and more specific, the kind where you know exactly what the other person is made of because you watched them be made of it. February came. Tax season. For the first time in 8 years, I did my own taxes. I want to be precise about what this meant. I sat down at the kitchen table with my W-2 and my mortgage interest statement and my charitable contribution receipts and the 1099-INT from the savings account, and I opened TurboTax on my laptop and I worked through it. It took me 11 hours spread across 2 weekends. The kids were at Derek's on the second Saturday, so I had the house to myself, and I sat at the kitchen table in my pajamas with coffee and the tax documents spread around me like a map of my own financial life, and I read every line. I made 2 mistakes. I initially entered the mortgage interest in the wrong field, and I missed a deduction for the educator expense credit, which I had been entitled to for years and had presumably been claiming all along, though I had no way of knowing what Pat had actually filed versus what she'd given me in the folder. I caught the errors myself, filed an amendment, and fixed them. The amendment was accepted. The refund was slightly larger than the original calculation. I bought a new folder for my copies. I chose blue, a plain medium blue manila folder from the office supply section at Target, the kind that costs 49 cents. I chose it on purpose because I wanted it to look nothing like the ones Pat had given me, those identical manila folders in their warm beige, labeled in her neat bookkeeper's handwriting, handed to me every February for 7 years with your copies, sweetie. I labeled the new folder in my own handwriting. Not neat. My handwriting has never been particularly neat, which is ironic for a teacher. But mine. I opened the folder twice before I filed it, checked every page, read every number, made sure the figures on the return matched the figures on my W-2, matched the figures in my bank account, matched the reality of my actual financial life as I now understood it. Because I understood it now. I had spent the past year learning things I should have known and hadn't, things that no one had taught me and that I had never thought to seek out because there had always been someone to hand me a folder and tell me it was handled. I knew what APR meant now. I knew what a credit utilization ratio was and why it mattered and how to manage it. I knew my rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, had read the actual text of it, had underlined the sections that applied to my situation. I knew how to read a credit report, not just the score at the top, but the full report, every account, every inquiry, every notation. I knew what a hard pull was, and when to allow one, and when to refuse. I knew what questions to ask a lender, and which answers were red flags. I knew things that should have been basic, that should have been taught somewhere, in school or at home, or in the general circulation of adult life, but that had never quite reached me, because I had been, for so long, content to let someone else handle the folder. Pat had counted on that. She had counted on my trust, yes, and on my gratitude, and on the particular social dynamics of a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law, where the power differential is subtle but real. But most of all, she had counted on my incuriosity, on the fact that I would take the folder and put it in the drawer without opening it. She had been right, for 7 years. She had been exactly right. I filed the drawer closed. The blue folder sat in it, next to the insurance documents, and the kids' birth certificates, and the mortgage papers, and the credit reports I now pulled and reviewed every 4 months, without fail, every account checked, every inquiry noted, every number verified against what I knew to be true. The drawer was organized differently than it had been before all of this. I had gone through it last spring, one Saturday afternoon, while the kids napped, and sorted everything, labeled everything, understood what everything was. It had taken 4 hours. Some of the documents I found I didn't recognize. Old insurance forms, a letter from a bank I didn't remember having an account with, a tax amendment notice from 2020 that I had never seen before, and that raised questions I had since asked Alan Whitfield about, and that were now resolved. 4 hours to understand the paper record of my own financial life. 4 hours that should have been distributed across the previous 7 years, 10 minutes at a time, rather than saved up for a reckoning. The new folder was blue. I had chosen it on purpose, because I wanted it to look nothing like the ones she gave me. And every year, when I open that drawer, I want to remember, trust is not a folder someone hands you. Trust is knowing what's inside.